All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for making time today to join today's eTruck Community First Technology Advisory Committee, CTAC for short. I know we're at the start in the midst of a heat wave, so I hope that everyone can stay cool and hydrated as we weather these next few days of this intense heat wave coming up here. So to get started here, I'll just go ahead and review this agenda real quick. So there are some new folks in the meeting today that are joining us for the first time. So we're going to give as we always do, a very brief, quick project overview and CTAC overview, just so that the folks that are new to this space can have a quick synopsis of this body and the overall project. And then we'll move forward from there with just some overall project updates that we want to share with you all before kicking it off to our guest presenter from CalStart, who will be doing the main chunk of the presenting and feedback solicitation as well for this meeting. And then towards the end, we'll have some discussion questions prepared for you all to prompt some feedback, and then Q&A as well that will open it up to everyone. And then before we get started, just want to take a moment to introduce the eTruck team to you all. So my name is Giovanni Hernandez. I'm Clean Mobility Program Manager with Grid Alternatives of Greater Los Angeles. And I'll hand it off to my colleague, Stella.
Thank you, Giovanni. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Stella Ursua. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships here at the LA office for Grid Alternatives. And I will hand it off to our CalStart partners. Tuan?
Thank you, Stella. Hi, everybody. My name is Tuan Chi. I'm the project manager here at CalStart. I work on the Clean Fuels and Infrastructure team. Thank you all for joining us today. I'll pass it to my colleague, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Tuan. Elizabeth Hellier here, project manager on the Clean Fuels and Infrastructure team at CalStart. Same as Tuan, and pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right, and I believe Kristen is unable to join us today, but we do have Andra Rogers from EPRI. If you'd like to introduce yourself to the group.
Hello, Andra Rogers. I'm with Electric Power Research Institute. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Andra. All right. So I'll hand it off to my colleague, Tuan.
Oops. Thank you, Giovanni. So just an overview on the eTruck project. If you're not fully familiar, our purpose is to create a California research hub to facilitate and accelerate the electrification of heavy-duty drayage vehicle. There are a couple of project goals and objectives with this. The first is to advance research and development and demonstration activities that extend the delivery range of these large weight class heavy-duty drayage trucks. We want to engage broad stakeholders with our community first approach, such as using the CTAC and the Workforce Development Advisory Committee, and use all of your input to promote equity and workforce development opportunities in priority communities and just overall in our projects. We work with pollution burden and impact communities, as well as truck fleets, charging equipment and service providers, electric utilities, and planning agencies. And lastly, we aim to plan, design, and deploy innovative and scalable public corridor charging strategies for heavy-duty electric trucks, and again, beginning with drayage trucks.
Thank you, Tuan. All right, so as promised, just a quick overview as well of this body, the Community First Technology Advisory Committee that was formed for this project. And really the goal is to use a community first engagement framework to ensure that pollution impacted, underserved, and tribal communities are involved in creating and guiding the initiative. Perfect example with today's meeting, the main focus of the presentation is this heat map equity layer tool, and also the presentation of citing criteria framework. And so again, in every phase of this project, we want to ensure that we are obtaining stakeholder and community feedback. And so, which is why it's so crucial to make sure that we hear from you all today on these two different items that we want to speak to you about today. And so very, very crucial piece to moving forward, right? And so, objectives with this in mind, is to help inform the project, again, on community engagement needs and impact, dissemination and solicitation of input on project activities from community members and groups, and promotion of equity in priority communities. And lastly, to foster a community-driven partnership for technology and zero-emission freight corridor development, planning, and site prioritization. I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Tuan.
Thanks, Giovanni. So I just want to provide you all with some overall project updates. So firstly, we do have an industry partner webinar series with our CTAC and WEDAC, where we bring in an expert from a specific sector of our industry to present on a topic that we're interested in. Our last presentation was on Drayage 101, and if you had missed that meeting, the slide deck recording and the fact sheet is now available on our website. I'll drop a link to that in a bit. Our next industry partner webinar will be on November 6th, and this will be on EV Site Planning 101. So what are the different stakeholders involved in planning and medium and heavy duty sites? What are the different steps and stakeholders? So we'll be sending out an invite for this webinar soon. Recently, we published 4 new reports on our website. I highly encourage you to go and read them. There are really good information there. We have one called the Freight Industry Outreach Memo, where we engage stakeholders to collect detailed information on fleet operational needs and pretty much assess the market status of battery electric vehicles with the high power charging equipment. We have another report on high power charging technology maturity assessment, where we interviewed EVSE manufacturers to understand the charging capabilities of current products and expected pathways to meet megawatt charging. And we have another version of that, but we interviewed battery electric vehicle manufacturers. So a lot of great information in these reports, and I'll drop a link in the chat for you all to take a look. As you know, we do have 2 pilot sites for our projects where we aim to deploy 2 sites, one in Ontario, California, and the other in Carson, California, to display public MDHD charging infrastructure, and we'll be collecting data and analyze data on the cost, utilization, and performance of these pilot site deployments, and construction began this summer for both pilot sites. So that's the progress on that. And next we have our regional freight heat map. So our current heat map on our website right now currently displays truck travel data, existing and planned medium and heavy duty charging deployments, and also truck parking locations. So this map will be updated with more comprehensive data as the project progresses, and with the next update to include an equity layer, which we have solicited your feedback on. My colleague Elizabeth will get into this a little bit more later on in the presentation. And then lastly, we are very active on our social media, especially our LinkedIn. So I highly encourage you to follow us on these social media channels, where we provide a lot of project updates and information. So if you scan the QR code, you'll have access to all of these channels. That is it for me. I'll pass it back to you, Giovanni.
Thank you, Tuan. All right. So wanted to give one last update here. As you all know, for a couple of months now, We've been providing updates on the status of the CBO stipends opportunity that we opened up. For folks that are new to the space, essentially, we were providing stipends for 6 community-based organizations, 3 for each of the advisory committees that Grid Alternatives facilitates. 1 which is for on the workforce side of things, a workforce development advisory committee, and then 3 other slots for this particular advisory committee, the CTAC. And so, as you know, we had sort of changed the timeline of the collaboration due to some technical delays for the project. And instead of starting this partnership last year, we really pushed it to this year, which meant finally selecting the 6 organizations that we were moving forward with for this partnership. And that selection took place, about like May, June of this year, with the new timeline of collaboration to begin, which already started on July 1st of this year, and it'll go through until June 30th of 2025. So I'm really happy to share with you all the names of the 6 organizations that we are moving forward with. First, on the workforce side of things, you can see on screen, we've selected Conservation Corps of Long Beach, Watsconda, and Hub Cities Career Center. We're really excited to partner with them on workforce related aspects of this project. Today, you will be introduced to the 3 organizations that you see on screen for this particular body on the community engagement sides of things. And so we're also really, really excited to have them here joining us for the first time for their first eTruck meeting. And we're going to actually give them all a chance to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Kendra from California Mobility Fund.
Hey folks, happy to be here. Kendra Ramsey, I'm the Executive Director of the California Mobility Fund. We're also known as CalBike. We are a statewide education organization for active transportation, specifically bicycling throughout California, working in a lot of communities. And I think we were asked to share how we planned on publicizing and doing this. We have a lot of folks we work with and communicate with throughout the state, about 40,000 on our email list, and then also a lot of community partners throughout the state that we'll also be talking with as well. So happy to be here and learn more and contribute. Thanks.
Thanks, Kendra. Let's kick it off over to Jocelyn from Sierra Club San Gorgonio chapter.
Awesome. I'm going to say it's San Gorgonio.
San Gorgonio. Yes, thank you.
Just think about the San Gorgonio Pass and like San Jacinto area, right? So my name is Jocelyn CTAC, go by Jaws. I am the chapter director for San Gorgonio Sierra Club. Sierra Club, like I've mentioned before, for those who don't know, Sierra Club is a national org, but is built up about over 60 chapters. California being the first chapter, Sierra Club California. Within California, we have 12 other chapters, and we're bigger than some states alone. Like my chapter is bigger than the state of Delaware's chapter, meaning we have a lot of members. We have a little over 6,300 members that are just in Riverside and San Bernardino County. However, as a whole, I mean, like we are built of incredible members who are constantly, organizing and fundraising to protect clean air and to protect our open lands and open spaces here in San Gorgonio. That's part of the reason we're excited to be part of this, stipend opportunity, because we are always out in the community reaching out and ensuring that folks know their rights and know how they can actually hold people accountable for clean air violations. and so on and so forth. We like to sue cities. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. The way that we've already been already activating information and spreading the information about great alternatives and the e-truck program is we already scheduled ourselves from now till next year. We're gonna be tabling in Fontana at both farmers markets on Thursdays and Sundays in North and South Montana. So that's already been set in stone, as well as any other activities at the local community colleges from San Bernardino Valley College to RCC to UCR to Cal State San Bernardino. We're getting some of our folks activated to table, and every single tabling event that we do, we're gonna have information about great alternatives. Even at our next fundraiser, where we're gonna have a whole entire table to ensure that folks know that we're being supported and given a stipend by the great alternatives, but at the same time, so folks know, what is going on. And a lot of our members is always gonna be in our emails, in our social media and everything in between. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm a team of one. Yay me. But my goal is to fundraise enough money to build the staff around this. And so one of our primary goals ultimately is to build a great relationship with all of you, especially Great Alternatives, so that we can continue this partnership for years to come, and hopefully just have, at the end of all of it, have one designated person just working on this within the chapter, because San Bernardino and Riverside counties in the Inland Valley, the Inland Empire, this is what we're trying to move towards. And we're suffering, we're dying out here, and so whatever we can do to fight a little harder, we're gonna do it. So it's been great so far. We're super proud to be a part of this, and we're gonna continue to make you guys proud.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Really appreciate that. Let's go with Eli from Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition.
Yeah, otherwise known as Bike LA. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. Just want to acknowledge that we also have Michael Tejera, who's also part of our team. So you'll see him in the gallery as well. So yeah, so Bike LA's been around for almost 25 years. One of the oldest bike advocacy organizations in Los Angeles. Our mission is to make LA a more vibrant, more equitable, more sustainable place by really encouraging access to meaningful alternatives to the car. And our focus is with the bicycle, but we're also very much tied into pedestrian advocacy and advocacy for people who ride transit. So it's really anyone who's multimodal on the active transportation side of the spectrum. Yeah, I mean, I think the main way we're gonna spread the word about e-truck in general and just great alternatives is through our engagements that we do with Ciclavia, which is one of the largest open streets events that happens in the States, let alone California. Generally, there's about 30 to 40,000 people that come out per event, and so as soon as we get some of those materials in hand, we'll set up a special part of our engagement focused on just raising awareness about this alternative way of moving larger goods. And we're excited also to develop some language and understanding about how to address the concerns that we're already starting to hear from folks about, like, what are these large vehicles? What are the safety concerns around them? How do they impact just road safety in general for people who ride and walk? I'm also eager to understand, like, what are the metrics of like a greenhouse gas emission offset that this is going to create? So really excited to get into more of those details as we get further into this, because the people in LA will be asking questions, and we just want to make sure we're armed with all the right information. And also, just if there's any, maybe I've missed it, but like FAQs that we can sort of work on that are more regionally sort of specific, so we can kind of make this real for the people that we're engaging with on the ground. We'll also do the standard social media and all those other different channels that we have available to us. But yeah, I mean, I think that my final thing is that the Olympics are coming, the NBA All-Star Game is coming, the Super Bowl is coming, the World Cup is coming, to LA. So we have these mega events coming here. And that means that there's going to need to be better, more equitable, more sustainable means of moving goods and people. And to the extent that this will serve LA long term by making goods movement and people movement just safer and more sustainable, like we're excited to be a part of that. So I think that's what I've got, and looking forward to working with you all. Thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you introducing yourself to everyone. And with that, just looking at time here, I want to move the program along and introduce our wonderful partner and guest presenter, Elizabeth, who is a program manager with CalSTART for the Clean Fuels and Infrastructure team. So Elizabeth, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Gio. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be able to present updates on the heat map and equity front for the eTruck project, but also the opportunity to hear from yourselves as CTAC members inputs on the work in progress. So in terms of heat map updates here, next steps, we have now officially launched heat map 1.0. The primary focus of heat map 1.0 really was to track freight travel patterns and activity happening around charging infrastructure in California. So on the one side, we're tracking truck volumes and freight corridors that are happening here in California. As we can see here, we've got a snapshot of the map on the left-hand side. Also tracking where trucks are currently parking and stopping in California. And then also tracking information on charging infrastructure that is currently being built and planned in California for heavy-duty freight trucks. So I think great. Thank you, Tuan. We have the link there to the first version of the heat map. And then we are also currently developing the second version of this heat map, which we can see here an example of how this map could be presented on the left-hand side. So this is updating this first heat map, which is kind of tracking activity and freight travel patterns, and then using this information in order to be able to project statewide charging demand for public charging infrastructure between 2030 and 2040. So we have a draft sample of results, and we can start seeing here some hotspots. So for high demand for charging stations for heavy duty trucks that are happening here in California. And so this map is due later on this year, so it's upcoming. And if we move on to the next slide. In parallel to working on the second version of the heat map, we are also integrating an equity layer. And so I've listed here on the left-hand side of the objectives that we've worked on as a team, but also integrating CTAC feedback on the objectives for this tool. But I think the primary objective here really is to provide these tools and visual aids to support the community engagement initiatives as part of the eTruck project. So we've heard from the CBOs, for example. So here is kind of providing visual tools that the CBOs can use in their work on the eTruck project, but also any CTAC member that wishes to engage and to provide resources to their own organization on this subject. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, we have the first stage of this equity layer really was to start tracking, on the one hand, where current medium and heavy-duty charging infrastructure is being deployed in California, but also tracking how do these overlay with disadvantaged community areas in California. So here we're using the definition of disadvantaged communities as is referenced in the SB 535. So I believe Tuan will also be linking there the reference, and you can also access this map, which we can see here are the yellow boundaries on the map on the left-hand side. So we can start identifying, a pattern of charging stations that are being deployed within these disadvantaged communities. And so if we go on to the next slide. Thank you, Gio. So here again on the right-hand side is the map that I was previously referencing to on the previous slides. And here on the left-hand side is a preliminary result of where we are seeing charging infrastructure demands and needs in California. So I just want to pause here for a minute and kind of direct your attention to certain areas of interest. For example, here this Central California area, so the San Joaquin Valley. So on the left-hand side, you can see that there are two major freight routes right, that link Northern and Southern California. And again, some very strong hotspots for charging infrastructure for heavy duty freights that have been identified so far in this area. And so then if we direct our attention to the right-hand side, we can see that this whole area, the San Joaquin Valley, really is located within a disadvantaged community. Again, similarly, we can see some freight activity there happening in the disadvantaged community, which I'm calling the Mojave National Preserve. So on the southeast side there of the map. And again, we can see that the Los Angeles County area here really is a hotspot for charging infrastructure demands, as we see here, by 2030. And again, the right-hand side map is a little bit too macro to be able to see, but significant areas of the Los Angeles County here are also considered as disadvantaged communities. This is kind of the first stage here is just really identifying and layering the information that we have available so far. And this equity layer will be integrated into heat map 2.0, which again is due at the end of 2024. And so we can move on to the next slide, which is the discussion area. So I just want to pause here so we can kind of collect inputs as a team here from the CTAC. Again, we can go back to the previous slide if needed while we're having this discussion, but I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes here. First of all, presenting some of the feedback that we have received so far from the CTAC. So what we're seeing here in the graphs are the results of a survey that was sent a couple of months ago to the CTAC, asking our CTAC members what map layers would they want to see on the second version of the heat map, and also what metrics for the equity layer would they like us to integrate. And so here we can see many of the map layers here on the left-hand side have already been integrated into the heat map. So we have the number of charging stations, the location, accessibility, and charging speeds in the form of the power levels of the chargers. Multilingual services is a great input there from the CTAC, especially as we have some freight corridors there linking the US and Mexico border. And so yeah, then again on the metrics for the equity layer side of things, again we had great input in terms of being able to pinpoint within the Cal and Varo screen metrics which specific metrics the CTAC is interested in being able to see on this equity layer. So as we can see, air quality, diesel particulate matter, traffic impacts, population density, climate action plan, and unemployment rates are some of the areas of interest there for the CTAC. And so I just wanted to pause here quickly and maybe ask the CTAC for some clarifications on some of these answers that we have received. One of them being the climate action plan metric, which is obviously open for interpretation. What do we measure with the climate action plan? Are we measuring, for example, if there are specific clauses within these climate action plans that are favorable for electrifying charging stations in the area for freight traffic? Or is there other elements of the climate action plan that we should be tracking and measuring and presenting in this map? And I see we have a hand up. What was this? Go ahead.
Thank you for your work. I'm particularly concerned about whether or not you delineate where heat islands are located in the neighborhoods that you are choosing to study. For example, trucks themselves are heat islands. The schoolyards are heat islands. But my question is, how do you triangulate the qualitative oversight or undersight with the quantitative data that you're presenting with regard to intersectional variables of identity? So how do you choose which disabilities or which things that make people die as a result of toxic air, toxic water, and so on and so forth? And then how do you racialize, how do you control for disabilities with regard to what causes asthma, and who and when do you cite people who do environmental racist work or do environmental justice work quantitatively and qualitatively from a triangular perspective?
That is a great question and obviously very challenging. So one of our sources here is the Cal Enviro screen, which does kind of already use this quantitative data and has, for example, the ratio and disability elements already integrated into this. So we are using the Cal Enviro screen as a whole. But then again, the idea of pinpointing, for example, we have asthma here, for example. The asthma cases that are linked specifically to freight traffic is one of the challenges of this project. And so, for example, here I have as a third question, is there any resources or thoughts on kind of being able to identify these communities that are most affected by freight and pinpointing freight? So the Calvin Viral Screen, for example, does not do so. It just uses air quality metrics and identifies areas where air quality as a whole it impacts communities, not specifically for freight. So maybe I can open it up also to the CTAC if anyone has a response here for Moses. And again, Moses, any resources that you have on this subject would be greatly appreciated as well.
Yeah, my resources are yours, but just let me know if anybody has any questions or need me to clarify or re-ask in a simple manner.
Mm-hmm. I see a message here from Sue Dexter. Did you have a response to Moses?
I do. For some reason, I can't seem to raise my hand, so I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to say, as far as the feedback here, I'm from Metrans at USC and Cal State Long Beach. We work on transportation related issues. I'm specifically investigating drayage truck in the southern region of California. But my interest here is that we have recently done a study in Southeast LA about Class 8 truck incidents, accidents, and potentially from an equity perspective, communities are quite concerned not only about air pollution and other types of things, but and traffic, but it's the accidents that are happening as well, which they find incredibly visible, of course, because that is a highly upsetting impact to their communities. So potentially part of this and putting on two additional equity layers is the accidents, making sure that any type of routing or where a specific charging station is going to be located will not exacerbate that situation. Just something to think about. I have all the data for the entire state of California. I'm happy to share that information if you deem to put a layer for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to know, can you qualify them and they? Do you mean non-human subjects and human subjects? And how do you racialize or gender? What intersections do you do that for the human theories of the human?
So accidents can, they're actually classified as if a human being was killed, or if it's a severe accident, people were injured, or there's property damage. So there's different levels of severity for the accidents as well that you can look at.
Thank you all for your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, safety has been definitely a feedback that we've heard during this project. Kendra?
Yeah, thanks. I actually was also going to mention crash data and specifically looking at, people walking and biking in these communities would be important, and kind of intersecting with that is looking at levels of people who are households who don't have vehicles, knowing that there may be more people, walking, biking, taking transit near these facilities, and just being able to prepare for that and make sure that, like the previous person stated, that, it's not going to exacerbate any concerns there. So looking at that data, and potentially also where they're intersecting with, where the locations are intersecting with transit facilities and highly used, potentially bicycling and walking facilities as well. And I will say that I believe a lot of the statewide crash data does break out by vehicle type. And so, collision data generally for crashes, but then also looking specifically at where crashes have been occurring with larger vehicles could be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kendra. Yeah, that's a really great input. We haven't integrated any, for example, levels of kind of a higher probability of people walking and cycling in an area. One of the things we are measuring right now is land use. So, for example, if it's a highly residential area versus an industrial warehouse area, then the industrial warehouse area would be prioritized over residential. But we don't yet have any data, for example, on active transportation being more likely in this area. So that's a great comment. Thank you. Ellie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. It's, by the way, it's just Eli, it's how we pronounce it. But just kind of a follow-up in LA, in the southeast cities, in a lot of these impacted areas, it's not just heavy industry. There's a lot of light industry that's next door to residential spaces, especially in communities that are disproportionately impacted by everything from traffic violence to environmental impacts from large goods movement. So I guess I'm wondering if there's what the nuance is that exists between heavy industry kind of areas that are more outlying versus like light industry, which is oftentimes embedded in these communities, and historically have been, communities that are also, dealing with these types of impacts at a greater level. Is there more, like, I guess the question is, what are the categories or what are the definitions of industrial to light industrial to residential, and if there's some more information on that?
Thank you, Eli. We're working with SCAG. So they are the organization that are providing the data on land use. I believe that their categories are available online, so I will do a search for you, Eli, and get back to you on that, because I don't have an answer in terms of the different categorizations and the scale, kind of the sliding scale between what's considered as residential and what it is industrial warehousing, for example. So yeah, I can definitely get back to you on that. So the e-truck project specifically focuses on class 7 and class 8 trucks, so the heavy duty side of freights as well. So we're not necessarily looking into, for example, the embeddedness of light duty vehicles within or medium duty vehicles within these communities. But again, this is why we're working with CBOs, for example, and the CTAC, is to be able to get some kind of case by case. Again, where we will advise on a station being installed really depends on the community itself, right, and the area itself. It would be very different between the Inland Empire, for example, and the LA County. So thank you for your feedback. And I will get back to you on the categories.
Liz, we did have a question here that came in through the chat from Ms. Jacqueline Badejo. She said, relative to the equity layer, is there a plan for more qualitative data to be collected regarding the initial findings shared today?
Yes, we are working on an equity white paper, which will kind of take into account all of the feedback and conversation that we have today, paired with, so we have done a literature review on this subject as well, and kind of interviews that we have been conducting as part of the project. So yes, there will be more information coming out on the subject.
Great. Just looking at time, Liz, can we move on to your next presentation, and then we'll have more time for discussion afterwards and questions.
Can I make one more comment? I can't figure out how to raise my hand. Okay. I'm Sumi Gann. I'm with the Gateway Cities Council of Governments. We're the 27 cities in Southeast Los Angeles that surround, started the port and go all the way up to LA with all of the accompanying impacts, environmental impacts that go with that. All of our cities are 95% classified as DAC on Cal Enviro screen. And we have been actually quite concerned about the location of e-truck charging in our communities. We've been told that we cannot manage, I won't say manage, I guess we can't direct private companies where they can operate or where they can locate these charging stations. They could be in residential, they could be anywhere they so choose if they can purchase the land. And so the impacts will be, quite substantial depending on the location. And that's something we're grappling with now. Is that something that you're addressing, I know you're saying where we recommend they go, but my understanding is they can go wherever they want to go. And that was, concern number one. And even earlier is, I think you've chosen some excellent groups to as your CBOs to work on this project. But I guess what I was looking at is in terms of the Southeast area, there's, the impacts are so great. And I was just wondering if there was a possibility of including maybe one or two CBOs working on this project who live in that area and would have some, be greatly impacted by whatever comes out of this.
Great. Maybe I'll pass it on to Tuan, who's kind of leading the CBO work.
Well, that's a follow-on question, but the first question I'd like to have answered too.
That is actually a great segue to the next part of the discussion, which touches exactly on this subject, Sui. So if maybe I'll just pause it to let Tuan maybe answer the second part of the question.
Yeah, Sumi, that's exactly why we have the CBO stipend opportunity, where we select CBOs that have a great presence in their community and are really tuned into what community members are concerned about and just, soliciting their feedback. So this opportunity will allow us to do the on-the-ground engagement that we're looking to do and collect that feedback using the CBO support. So yeah, we're definitely integrating that into our project.
And if I can just add, Tuan and everyone, to Sumi's question, Sumi, we started the stipend selection process. I think it was, Giovanni, was it late last year? We didn't get a lot of feedback, a lot of interest, and I completely understand people are so overwhelmed right now, work up to their eyeballs. And so, it was something that we definitely tried to get more involvement from local community groups. We went through the selection process. These were the folks that met the criteria for this particular role. And so, hopefully, we'll be able to, address your concerns as well as we move forward with this project. We want to make sure that we keep this in mind as we're doing the community engagement piece. So thank you for this.
Yeah, and then what I'll add is in relation to you brought up the Southeast community being heavily impacted, and we agree. And so we do have members of the CTAC that have a heavy presence in the Southeast, such as the CELA Collab. We have a very close working relationship with Dr. Franco that heads the CELA Collab and who actually referred Me-Trans to this group, and other Southeast partners that are part of the CELA Collaborative that we are engaging, and they have participating in other meetings. They just couldn't make it today. So we do have leaders of that particular Southeast LA communities represented in this group. So I did want to mention that as well, because I heard that was a concern, and we do have partners that represent that region.
Yeah,
All right.
I was
go ahead.
referring to stipended groups, but because in fact,
Yeah.
CELA and I are in partnership with the CELA Collab on the Gateway Cities Regional Climate Collaborative, along with other CBOs. And I guess that's my issue is none of the others are also included, but
we do have one for the Workforce Development Advisory Committee, which Hub Cities Career Center is located in the Southeast. And so the Southeast is represented on that end. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. And this is the first meeting, so I'm jumping in without any background, so
no worries. Thank you, Sumi. Appreciate it. Liz, I'll kick it off to you with the citing criteria framework.
Thank you, Gio. So yeah, in the time is running out, so I'll go a little bit faster than I was originally planning, but that's fine. And also maybe also to answer your question, Sui, and to also give context to the CTAC as to what is this ZEV infrastructure citing criteria. So one of the final projects of this project is a statewide infrastructure deployment plan, which advises the CEC, so the California Energy Commission, on a network of heavy-duty freight charging stations across California, kind of advising where priority locations should be. And this is also a tool that would help funnel funding opportunities. So this is our way that we're hoping that with the statewide deployment plan, we would be advising on certain areas, for example, which are highly residential, to not be built up for charging stations based on the criteria that we can see here, the 5 criteria that we've identified for this project. So we will be focusing on the equity criteria and how do we measure the impacts, equity metrics in this project, in the site, in selecting where sites should be prioritized. So here I've put down the main priority of this equity metric, which is to ensure that the deployment of charging infrastructure does not adversely impact the DACs, right? So that's the kind of the main objective here that we're working towards. But I did also want to pause on this slide to give you an idea that the equity criteria comes into play in a larger context. So when we're prioritizing sites, we're also looking, for example, at utilization, which is the truck volume. So we know that there is, for example, a high volume of trucks going through this area, and there is going to be a high demand for a charging station in this area, for example. Land use, so for example, prioritizing areas that are more residential warehouse versus residential. Grid capacity, right? So again, this is a very significant criteria for the e-truck project, as we are trying to, for example, minimize the grid upgrades that are needed for this network, right? If we choose locations where significant grid upgrades are needed to build this network, then that will have an impact, for example, on the ratepayers. The bills for electricity will go up. So this is, again, something that we are actively working towards in this project. And then environmental conditions, right? There are certain sites that could be prioritized, for example, brownfields that have, for example, land that isn't being used because there may be, for example, industrial or toxic waste. Right now, that could be, for example, converted into a charging station, would be prioritized versus a residential area. And so if we move on to the next slide, we can kind of delve a little bit deeper into the equity metrics that are currently used in this project. So the first metric is the distance to DACs. And so again, one of the concerns that we've heard from the community of our partner ICF, which has worked with us on this metric, has said really is trying to focus on minimizing local congestion, noise, and safety issues from increasing truck traffic in an area, right? What we want to avoid is placing a truck station in an area where there is currently minimal truck traffic and kind of creating a truck magnet and bringing extra congestion in this area. And so with this in mind, the first criteria here that we're using is a parcel that is located just outside of the DAC, right? We're using a 2-mile measure here for what we're counting as just outside of the DAC. So not inside of that, but just outside of the DAC, we'll have the highest score in this siting criteria. So we'd receive the score here of 10. And so we're trying to incentivize the placement of this infrastructure, not necessarily in the disadvantaged community, but just outside, but then making sure that the disadvantaged community does get the positive impacts of having a station nearby, for example, without increasing congestion. And on the second criteria that we're using here, which is the direct benefits in DACs. And so here we want to make sure that we're prioritizing sites that effectively serve these communities and making sure that they are getting the benefits, for example, of improved air quality in the communities. And so how we're doing this is that we're making sure that a parcel of land where a potential charging station could be is scored higher if trucks that are projected to charge at this location are going through a disadvantaged community, right? So there is a one-for-one transition from a diesel truck to an electric truck that would be going through the disadvantaged community. So we can see a direct improvement of air quality by having a station in this location, for example. And so what we're trying to avoid here, for example, is having a charging station in a location where trucks are arriving in different directions and aren't going through the disadvantaged communities, but are charging in the disadvantaged community. So they're not just getting the direct benefits of having a station in that area. And so for the sake of time, we're running out of time here. So if we just go to the next slide. our team has prepared a few questions here for the CTAC based on the metrics that I presented previously. So the first question, of course, is, do these two equity criteria and the scoring system that we've developed as part of the eChat project successfully capture community needs? And would there be any additional criteria needed? I know we touched upon this a little bit in the equity layer conversation, so I'll just open it up to the CTAC.
I'm not really sure how you're making the criteria. So is the purpose of this, you're creating criteria for where these EV charging stations will be located? And for our communities, if they're traveling the 710, they're going to have to drive through a DAC to get there, or they'll have to be placed in a DAC, which is our biggest concern. But you know, the DAC is so wide, you know, we wouldn't want to encourage people to drive, you know, 3 miles through the DAC to get to a charging station on the one hand. And on the other, we wouldn't want to have the charging station in a residential community, which is essentially what surrounds the 710. So
yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So actually, if we just go back 2 slides. Thanks, Gio. So yeah, so for example, land use would be the criteria that we're using to avoid a station being built, for example, in a residential area. And then the equity criteria presented would be the scoring that we would be using to make sure that the DACs are getting the benefits of a station being installed there. So it would be a truck going through a DAC that would be converted into an electric truck. But again, there are certain areas, right? For example, the kind of central California there, the San Joaquin Valley, which has 2 major freight corridors going through, and the whole area is considered a disadvantaged community, then we wouldn't necessarily be able to use the first equity criteria of having the station just outside of the DAC. And so we would weight more heavily on the second criteria of making sure that the disadvantaged community is getting the direct benefit of the station being there. And also maybe, Sumi, you could provide some feedback on the second question. Sorry, Gio, if you can go back to this slide. So the second question there, and the third also, is this question of when stations do need to be installed in these disadvantaged communities, what are some of the ways that we can amplify these positive effects for the surrounding communities, right? What can we do when building the station? For example, you know, another thing that the eChat project is looking into is local workforce development programs. And or, for example, are there specific amenities that could also help the community that is living around these charging stations? Is our kind of the other side of the coin there. So trying to avoid building these stations in areas that would negatively impact disadvantaged communities. And then in areas where we have to build stations in disadvantaged communities, how do we mitigate those effects?
yeah, I think the workforce development is a positive that you guys are already addressing. But you know, and that's kind of why I'm thinking there should be at least one CBO located in the Southeast Los Angeles area, because that's going to be true throughout this whole thing, is that the people who live in those communities will be impacted by having a truck charging facility in their neighborhood, and they'll also be impacted by having additional trucks driving through their neighborhood to get to a truck charging facility outside of their neighborhood. You see what I'm saying? It's sort of a no-win situation. And I don't want to speak for those residents, but I would love those residents to have a voice in this process.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, I'll let Grid Alternatives Antoine, who are kind of leading the CTAC and workforce development work, take into account that input.
What I will say, and thank you, Sumi, for that, for your comments. What I will say, we do have some future community engagement work planned for the latter part of this year, most likely for sure going into next year on some surveying that we want to do with impacted communities that we're speaking about. Some town halls that we want to organize, whether they're via Zoom or in person. We're trying to see what's going to be feasible with the budget and staff. But that is planned work we have as community engagement efforts that we have planned for this project to execute to obtain that resident feedback that you mentioned, Sumi. And so obviously the Southeast is a big chunk of the priority area, but also other areas closer to like the pilot sites, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something we are planning to execute. I see that Kendra had her hand up and then Amber did.
Yeah, this is Kendra. I was just going to say, kind of going back to before, looking at the kind of context around the facility and making sure that any people walking, biking, and taking transit, that those facilities are both available and clearly indicated to the folks who will be driving their trucks in. You know, it can often create a new conflict point, and so upgrading some of those bicycle pedestrian transit facilities directly, you know, near and on the route to these sites would be pretty important. A lot of times new housing developments are required to do that when they're siting. So just thinking about that, that context and preparing to reduce potential conflicts in that way.
Thank you, Kendra.
So Amber?
Amber,
Oh,
I see your hand up.
No, go ahead. Let Amber speak.
Oh, hi. I'm Amber Cluse. I'm with the Port of Los Angeles. My comment is that rather than having it scoring higher, like being 2 miles away from a DAC, why don't you have scoring where it gets a higher score the closer it is to an existing truck route or to the freeways? So that way truckers aren't going into these communities or anywhere near the communities. They stay closer to these routes instead, and maybe try and work in like that. Now's the time to try and figure out, is there more efficient truck routes that wouldn't actually go through these communities or near these communities? Because this is the time to be thinking about this. It's about efficiencies where it will both help the driver to get where they're going in a shorter amount of time and not impact any of these communities.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Amber. That's what we're working on at the Gateway is, you know, identifying all the truck routes in our communities and trying to see if we can recommend some sites that this might work best. But what we're also being told is that we can't force it. We can just recommend, and it's I guess that's what we're doing here as well in this meeting. Or what the outcome of this is recommended sites as opposed to assigned sites, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the port is also looking at those types of things when we look at what sites that we want to fund. We look at how much of an impact would that have and try and reduce the amount of impact it would have to DACs. We would only try to fund ones that are closer to truck routes as well.
Yeah. And I guess that's sort of the catch-22 we're in at Gateway is that those are all DACs along the corridor. So they're already getting the double whammy. You know what I mean? It's they're going to be, if you locate them only along the corridor, you're only locating them in DACs along the 710 in the Southeast.
Thank you, Sumi. And again, feel free to continue this conversation offline. You can email the team and we'll be happy to continue this conversation. But I know that we are sadly out of time for this discussion, so I'll send it back to Gio.
Yes,
This has been
thank you,
amazing
Elizabeth.
feedback. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I
thank you,
overlooked.
Elizabeth.
If you guys want feedback, let me know. Thank you for the racism in this meeting. I'm sorry it happened this way.
Moses, thank you so much for all the comments. I know Aaron messaged you about some resources you had mentioned, Moses. So I don't know if you have still access to a message that went to you from Aaron that wanted to engage further with you about your comments and resources that you had mentioned, but I really appreciate your time and the comments that you provided today. Additionally, thank you everyone who provided feedback. I know we ran out of time today. I am going to follow up with everyone on an email for the ability to also provide any more questions and comments and feedback in written format due to just running out of time. This was a very good discussion, definitely given us a lot to think about, a lot to digest, a lot to consider, as we move forward and into other phases of this project. So do look out for that email with one. I'll be sending out the links and resources that different folks have provided that was requested that we all send in a follow-up email. So Ms. Badejo, we will definitely accommodate that and do that, as well as the copy to the PowerPoint presentation so everyone has access to it. And as a reminder for people to be able to share any written feedback that they would like. So with that, I know we're up on time here, so I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to continued engagement and partnership. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks for showing us who you are, brother.